There's no reason why that couldn't be your story.
You don't have an expiration date.
Ooh, I love that.
The actual pages. Like, that's all that matters at the end of the day.
This is the Authors and Agents podcast. Al, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to chat with you, to get to know you, and first of all, to hear about your novel coming out, Caught in a Bad Fauxmance. Could you tell me about that?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here. It's always so exciting and so weird that I actually get to talk about this book now after, I think it's been 2 years of working on this book quietly and just not really talking about it very much. So actually being able to talk about it and be like, oh yeah, it's coming out in in this case, maybe like a couple days, or right now, as I'm speaking, a couple months, it feels wild. But yeah, Caught in a Bad Fauxmance is my debut. It is a queer YA rom-com coming from Joy Revolution, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. It is about Devin Baez, who is an aspiring artist who has had a very lackluster first semester in art school and goes home and wants to decompress, but his family is like, no, we're going to go to our lake cabin one last time, and we're going to sell the cabin when we're done. And the cabin's tied up in all these feelings because it was one of their favorite places to go with their late mother, so there's a lot of complicated feelings about selling this cabin. His sister, who's his twin sister, is kind of being weird to him ever since he got home, so he's a lot on his plate, only to arrive in this little town, and they run into their longtime rivals, the So Cooks, and their middle son, Julian, who is a particular rival of Devin's, decides to propose a fake dating scheme to him, and it all goes downhill, or maybe uphill, depending on how you see it from there.
It all goes how you might expect a fake dating scheme to go, right?
Exactly. It is a romance, so I'm sure you can guess where it goes.
I love it. I was just telling somebody that, I don't typically read romance. Lately, I've been on this great romance kick. And I'm like, for my anxiety, it's so nice to be like, okay, I'm reading a romance. These characters are wonderful. Yes, there's going to be something terrible, but I know how it ends, and I don't need to feel anxious about it.
There's something so comforting about getting to the end and just being ooh, yes, they're going to end up together, or at least you get the happily for now, and that's what my brain needs in a life of uncertainty. I need to know that they're just going to smooch and get together by the end.
Exactly. They're going to be in love at the end, and that's what I need to know.
That's all I need. That's all I need to know. It's fine. I don't care how we get there. Let's go.
Exactly. Well, how exciting. I'm so thrilling to have your debut novel come out into the world. So tell me a little bit about your journey up to this point to being published finally.
Yeah. I've been writing kind of my entire life. I started writing, I think I wrote my first short story when I was in kindergarten. I wrote a little short story about a horse. I had never seen a horse in person. I don't know why I wrote about a horse, but it was very exciting at the time. And then I eventually, as a child, realized, oh, I can rewrite the endings to all these books that I like. I can put myself in the story if I want to, which I later learned once I got to the teens that was fan fiction, and I went full hog on that. So I did kind of just the fun writing it down kind of stuff, changing the endings to books that I read. Then I started doing self-insert fan fiction when I was 13 up until I was maybe 14 or 15. Did some more fan fiction and also some original stuff for several years in high school. I also started writing plays in high school, which was very cool. Mostly I was writing, fiction, and that was the first time that I had tried something in a different medium. I never did poetry. I've tried poetry over the years. I'm not very good at it.
I'm with you there.
Yeah, I admire anyone who can do it. I tried it, and it was not very good on my end, but writing has just been such a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. My dad actually was a poet, so he was very passionate about writing, and encouraged me to do it a lot when I was a kid, as did my mom. And then when I went to college, this is I swear this is all leading somewhere.
No,
then I went to college.
Keep going. You're good.
It's a very long story, weirdly. Yes. The actual story of the book is rather short, but the journey to get there was long.
Exactly.
Yeah. Though when I was in college, I didn't know what to major in. I wanted to major in something that was going to be productive in the sense that I wanted to get a job when I graduated. So I was studying computer science for a really long time, and I didn't like it at all. I was really struggling, and my parents encouraged me. They were like, you clearly really like to write, and there's a creative writing program that had just started at my college, And I was like, well, what if I applied for something like that? And I was like, I'm so nervous that it wasn't going to be worth my time and that I wasn't going to get a job out of college. At that point, I'd started doing some internships, so I kind of knew what path I was going to take, and it was not computer science. They were like, just do it, go pursue what you want to do. You clearly have an idea of what you want to do. It's what you're passionate about. That's what you should do. Because my parents themselves did not really necessarily get to study something they were super passionate about, especially my dad. So they were very adamant that you should study what you're passionate about, and that's why you're going to college,
right?
At least. So I was very lucky. I got into the creative writing program, and I did that. And then I graduated with a degree in creative writing, and I proceeded to not write for like 3 years because I was like, it just burnt me out so much. And it just really changed my relationship with writing, having it be a measure of my value and the way that the writing that I was doing was treated. I had certain ideas in my head about what is important things that you can write about and what is not.
Right.
So in my mind, I'm thinking that the things that I like to write about, which is like romance and comedy, were not seen as like valid or important or worth your time, basically. So I took a long break from writing, and then I think like 3 years later, I started doing a podcast where I read my old cringy self-insert fan fiction just for fun with some friends, because it's so bad. And it's just fun to read when you're a little tipsy with your friends, or even when you're not tipsy, because it's just that wild. And then I started writing fan fiction again, because I was like, well, I think I've improved a little bit. Let me try it again. Did that for a little bit, and I was like, okay, I'm flexing the muscles again. And then from there, it's like, I want to attempt to write a book. I think it's finally time. I had never written, like, sitting down and really tried to write a book. I did a thesis in college, which was the first portion, like the first 100 pages of a book. But it, like, I didn't have plans to finish that, especially after I graduated. So I put that on the side, and I'm never going to come back to that book probably. But this was my first true attempt, because I knew I'd always wanted to write a book. It was something that I had really enjoyed. Fiction has always been like my main love. And once I discovered that you can write for teenagers, I was like, oh, this is a perfect fit. And I can write romance, also a perfect fit. So I started to write my debut, I think it was during the pandemic, but like later on into the pandemic. It's like, it technically is a pandemic book, even though I'd been like writing and whatnot and noodling around for quite a while. So it was, I think, in like around May during the pandemic. I don't remember what year that was, but
no worries.
May of the pandemic is when it started. That's where that comes from. So this is actually the first book I've ever written. But I always say, like, I've been writing my entire life, and it's been a very long journey leading me to write that specific book.
Yeah.
So that's the long version of a short book.
I love it. Well, hey, you don't need to qualify the journey, because I feel like every author's journey is long in whatever regard, right? Even those unicorns who are like, oh, I wrote this book, and 2 weeks later I had the biggest book deal ever, like they still had lots of things that happened to them that helped them get to that point.
Very, very excellent point.
Yeah. So you finished the book. You were ready to start querying. How did querying go for you?
So I knew when I finished I do this thing a lot, which is why I went from being a pantser to being a plotter, which is that the first couple books that I, like, not the first, like, book and a half that I wrote, I realized midway through that I wanted to change the ending, and I had to go back to the beginning to make it fit what the new ending was going to be.
Right.
So I did that twice with Fauxmance, and I kind of realized after I finished it that I was like, yeah, it's done. I could query this, but I just don't feel like it's right. I feel like there's just something fundamentally not right about this, but I couldn't figure out what it was. So I actually did a mentorship program. I did Author Mentor Match, which sadly no longer exists, but I did meet my amazing mentor, Justine Pachella-Winans, there, and they kind of helped me shape the book, take the bones and the idea of the book. And I think, like, I always say that I would not have probably been able to publish this book without them, because I think that what they taught me really was how to craft an actual traditionally published novel, because I was coming from a world of fan fiction where your characters can kind of just be hanging out, not doing anything, and they eat that up.
Right.
You love seeing them hang out together. But when you're trying to craft a traditionally published novel, there are certain beats that you should be taking. A book can't really be too long. It was certainly very, very long. It also was in third person, so I decided to change it to first person because it was more immediate and a little bit more fitting with the genre. I was also very severely underread in YA romance. I was, I guess, a little foolish in thinking that I could just write this book and know exactly what the market is like. And I was like, no, I definitely needed to do my research first. So that involved several major rounds of revision first with my mentor, and also several friends that I had made through the program or just kind of through writing Twitter and whatnot, and they really helped me shape the book. And then once I was ready to query, I did like a very small batch. I think I had maybe, I started with like 100 agents. So I was like, okay, this is just everybody who takes YA romance, and narrowed that down to about 50 with the help of friends and like Whisper networks to be like, okay, these are 50 people that it seems to be that they are vetted and they can be trusted. And then I went from there into querying.
Wonderful. So what would your top tip be for other people who are querying right now? What would, from your experience, what would your advice be?
I always feel bad giving query advice because in like full disclosure, I was not querying very long. I got my first offer from who would eventually become my agent 10 days into querying. And I was like, I don't know really what it's like to be out there for a very, very long time. So I don't want to weigh in on that. And I know like the querying landscape has changed so much since when I was querying, which I think was in 2021, and it continues to evolve so much in so many different ways. But I think that something that I do find very helpful is getting the eyes of peers on your query is very helpful. I always say, like, you don't need to pay someone. You don't need to pay anyone if you don't want to at any point in the process. I did not wind up really spending any money on ultimately publishing my debut. And I think that if you just have some people that you can look to, even if you don't have like a community, like, I know Twitter is not really a thing as much anymore, but if you don't have a community, there are places like on Goodreads, there are different places where you can put your query. On Reddit, there are different places where you can put your query. There are forums that you can find. So there are other different online spaces where if you don't have a community yourself, where you can share your work and your query letter and get eyes on it from other people, which I think is so helpful because it helps you, once you've been staring at something for so long, take yourself out of it and get especially a perspective from someone who maybe is like coming in blind or like doesn't know your genre as well might be very helpful, because then they're like, well, I don't really understand why X, Y, and Z. That can sometimes be very helpful because, you're so well read in your genre. You're like, well, duh, of course the stakes are that they're not going to get together. But, sometimes they'll be able to help you point out, oh, there should be added stakes here. That should be clear. That's not obvious, and things like that. But also a big tip that I have personally, because I know this is something that I definitely struggled with, is like, you can't just keep editing forever. There comes a point where you have to bite the bullet and just do it. If I could, I would have edited every single one of my works just forever and never sent them out. But I was lucky that I had another person kind of to push me out of the nest very gently and let me fly. But I've seen my friends do it as well, just this hesitance to think like your work has to be 100% perfect, and it's never going to be 100% perfect. You're going to sign with an agent, you're going to do revisions almost no matter what. So it's okay when you feel as sure in your work as you can, just send it. It's okay. Yeah. And then, go from there. You can gauge the responses, but don't dig yourself into that editing hole, being like, no, I'm going to keep working on it. And then you spend all this time and you never send it out.
Yeah. And that's great advice. I think it is crucial to find a community when you can, where you can. I think back to some of my early querying days. Probably was like my second book that I queried. I did something similar where there was like a query edit or query review forum. Mm-hmm. And I think my one word of caution is you don't know who is reviewing your query. And the advice, take it with a large spoonful of salt.
For sure. Yeah.
But in a pinch, it is a great way to be like, oh, just how is some random stranger reading this and getting eyes on it is really helpful. Because when you've been staring at that query letter forever and you're like, I think it's terrible. Yeah. Or it could be amazing. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. It's really good to have fresh eyes on it.
It's like, be careful where you're posting things. And, I feel like sometimes you can gauge. Like, I definitely had some people review my work who I was like, why did you read this? Like, they would be like, I hate romance. And I was like, well, I'm no disrespect, but I am probably going to throw out all of your feedback then because you hate romance.
Exactly.
So it's like you're not interested in this. But sometimes people who are, like they're like, I don't read romance very much, but sometimes they can, that can be some of the most helpful advice you can get. Who knows?
Definitely, definitely. So, so speaking of this wonderful rom-com that is coming out, what is something you hope your readers take away from Caught in a Bad Fauxmance?
I hope they laugh. It's very silly. I have a thing where I'm like, I don't like to describe myself or my book as funny. I don't know why. I just have like a thing in my head. I'm like, that's so braggadocious to say that you're funny. So I have that in my head. I'm like, I don't want to say that it's funny, but it's intended to be. It's intended to be funny. I hope people find it that I have succeeded on that front. But a big thing is that kind of the reason that I chose to write this book is because I needed something personally after working on other things that were like much heavier, especially when I was in college, like working on like very projects that really focus on like your trauma and things like that.
Right.
I really wanted something light and fun, and especially for me, I was kind of writing this wish fulfillment thing of a queer Puerto Rican family where like both of the kids are queer and nobody cares. No, it's like it's totally fine. There's no coming out narrative. It's just a super like happy, queer, joyful book where all of the families are supportive and the points of contention within the families are more about the outside factors like the plot and all these other things going on, but not their identities. And that was really important to me. So I'm hoping that if any queer Latin readers pick it up, that they can feel comforted in this kind of community that I've created, and they can feel that warmth that I felt when I wrote it, because it was, I always say to people that I wrote this book for me first, and then it happens to now be for the world, and that was the editing process, was editing it to be for the world. And I hope that other readers are just able to feel what I felt when I set out to write this project, that it's just something for you to feel happy and to feel loved and to know that worlds like this can exist.
You know what? We all need a little bit more happiness, a little bit more love, a little bit more laughter in our lives. Nothing wrong with that.
More living, more laughing, more loving.
Yes. Hashtag live, laugh, love. I remember that being such a big thing. And now, if you had told me back then, like, people are going to mock you for that someday, I would have been like, no.
No, I'm standing by live, laugh, love.
Yes. I'm going to live, laugh, love even harder.
I'll show you.
Exactly. Well, tell me who some of your favorite authors are to read and why you love them.
Ooh, okay. So, I mean, in YA, Adam Silvera, obviously, because that's, was the first time that I ever read a book that had, queer Puerto Ricans specifically, and I was like, oh, we exist in books! Oh my god! So that was very exciting to read, and I just love all of his books. That's like, to me, the definition of being seen is reading those books, which was very, very exciting. That was the first time I finally understood, like, oh, that's the importance of writing these characters. This is what it means for someone else to read something like this. So that was very exciting. That always stands out in my heart. Of course, I love Casey McQuiston, just rom-com goodness, so funny. I'm trying to think. I really, really like Jessie Q. Sutanto's books. I think that's just like a really fun blend of like, she's just so funny. So I was like, I just love her voice that she has in her books. I love Dial A Ferrantes. I recommend it to like everyone that I meet. Oh my gosh. I really loved, oh my god. One of my favorite books of, I think, was it 2020? No, 2023 is this year. 2022 when it came out was Sonora Reyes' Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. I love that book. I went to Catholic school. I'm also queer. I just related very intensely to that book. Yes. I also loved their second book as well. So highly, highly recommend. I love as well Rachel Lippincott and Allison Derrick, who are a wife-wife duo who wrote a sapphic rom-com, and it is so cute. And like, both of their books individually are also amazing. So when they come together, it's just like, mwah, chef's kiss. It's so good.
I love it. Those are some great recommendations. I love questions like that, and the last question that I'll ask you, because while we have so many books we need to read, it's always good to add more to our list.
Yeah,
there's nothing
why
wrong
not?
with that.
Just let it grow. Just let the TBR grow.
Yeah, let it grow. No big deal. So if you were to, well, and you sort of already are, so my next question is about genre hopping. So if you were to genre hop, what would you want to write? And your next one, 10 Things I Hate About Prom, is also a romance, right?
Yes.
But then your next one, The Girl You Know, is a little different. So tell us about genre hopping, and then even further, what would you want to write besides this next two?
Yeah. So my third book, The Girl You Know, is a thriller. It's a dark academia thriller, and it is 100% different from the first
It
book, except that the main character, she's also Puerto Rican and queer. So that's kind of the only similarity to the
There you
first
go.
book at all. But I, as a person, my two things that I read are romance and thriller. So I knew from the beginning, like, oh, I really, really want a thriller. This book specifically was really inspired by the book Sadie by Courtney Summers. I didn't say Courtney Summers. Courtney Summers is another author that
You just did. You just did. You're good.
it came back. I stated it. I love Courtney Summers. So that was really inspired by that book. I knew I really wanted to write something very, very dark and like exercise a different muscle in my writing, which was something a little bit more literary. It has its moments of comedy, kind of, but it's definitely not a funny book. It definitely is putting the dark in dark academia. And it's just kind of based on what my reading tastes are. I love thrillers. I love plot twists. If you tell me a book has a really good plot twist, I will sit there and I will finish it in like one sitting because I need to know. That's like my biggest, I guess, like character flaw as a person is that I need to know everything. So if you leave anything on a cliffhanger, I need to find out. So that was a big thing, was I knew I wanted to write something that has a plot twist of some sort, and thriller is the best place to do that. But also just writing something that felt very, very tonally different. So that was where I went with that. But I will say, like, I cannot world build for shit. So I say I cannot do fantasy. My brain's simply not big enough. I commend anyone who can write fantasy, like even contemporary fantasy. God bless you. I don't know how you do it. I think about any type of world building and then my brain just goes like, brr, I can't do it. So I don't think I'll be writing fantasy, or funnily enough, my book that I wrote as my honors thesis was an adult sci-fi. I don't think I can do sci-fi either, and I think it's pretty clear in that thesis, even though it was decent, that I do not know how to world build, because it's not my strong suit. I just can't do it. So fantasy, sci-fi, like maybe speculative that's a little more like grounded. I like ghosts. I feel like I could do something with ghosts.
You could do something horror related. I could totally see like a Puerto Rican queer horror book.
There we go. I definitely am interested in horror because I love scary movies. I eat them up. I love horror, especially like my thriller, I think leans almost into like a horror in terms of its like tone. It feels a little bit less mystery and at times, and it feels a little more horror in the themes that it explores. But that's definitely something that I like really want to do. I love anything paranormal, and the world building does not have to be that intense. So I think definitely the next thing, my biggest next thing that I'm thinking about a lot is like going into adult. So that's probably in terms of, it's not a genre per se, it's an age group, but sticking in like romance and adult romance and adult thrillers, but also in YA, just horror potentially, I think is the next stepping stone. If you see me write a fantasy, I'll be shocked. Like, let me know. I would love to know how I did it. Maybe I'll do it someday. I struggle with it a lot, and I'm not very well read in that genre either, but I'll be shocked if it happens, but who knows? I just love to write. I have a list of idea doc that's like 7 pages long, so who knows?
Well, I love the, like that you're not pigeonholing yourself to just write one thing, like that's never great and not good for like creativity, I think, in my opinion. I mean, some people are just so good at the one thing that they do that they're just going to keep doing it over and over again, but give yourself the freedom to branch out a little bit. I think that's great.
I mean, God bless anyone who can write just one genre and have their characters not all sound the same, because I definitely noticed that I do that. I'm like, I have to actively really, really try to make the characters not sound exactly the same all the time. So I commend anyone who can just be like back to back to back to back, same genre.
Yeah. So I have just a couple questions left for you. I'd love to know what you like to do when you're not writing.
Yeah. Well, watch horror movies.
There you go.
I love video games. I love video games so much, which I feel is a very common thing amongst writers. And there was, at one point, writing used to be my hobby. I used to write all the time and do fan fiction and stuff like that. So that used to be my hobby. But at one point, I was considering applying for this job that would involve writing for video games, and I was like, I don't think I can do this. I was like, I don't think I can do this because I would lose my one thing, like my one pure little joy, which is that I love to play video games, and it's not for profit. I just do it for fun. And I was like, I don't think that I could ever do that because my day job, as well as I'm also a writer in my day job. So I was like, this writing is kind of taken up in every single way in my life, and I can't really write for pleasure the way that I used to. So I'm going to leave this alone. I'm not going to become a video game writer, even though that sounds amazing in theory. I need to leave something demonetized that I can enjoy. So video games, number one. In general, I love just movies. I love television shows, like watching media of all sorts. I love going to the movies, even though I haven't been able to do it as much lately. Trying to think. I love just walking. I live in New York, so I feel like just walking around in New York is its own activity. So I also just don't know how to drive. I'm filling out a lot of stereotypes by not knowing how to drive. But I love to go out with my dog, just take her for our little walks through the city, just exploring, New York is one of my favorite things to do. So, yeah.
I love it. I love that you're keeping video games purely a hobby for yourself. Don't
Just
ruin it by making it a job, okay?
if I see that job again, I'm going to be like, no, I saw you already, and I said no, I won't do that.
Don't do it.
I'm
Don't do
not
it.
going to do this.
Well, my last question for you, I feel like you've already name dropped and just said so many great books for us to add to our list, but I'd love to know what your favorite book is right now. Not your favorite book of all time,
Okay.
but just something you've read recently that you want to tell people about.
All right, I have a couple. I have I have Goodreads like completely blocked on my computer. I do not know anything. If you've reviewed my book, thank you. I don't know what it says. I don't want to read reviews at all. I have never ever seen any of them at all. But anyway, all that to say, I blocked Goodreads. I just don't want to see them. So what I do is something that my dad used to do. So it's like an homage to him, is that he writes down every book that he reads, and his system of rating them was 1 star was like, he would put a little 1 asterisk beside it if he really liked the book, and 2 stars meant it was like one of his favorite books of the year. And he would just wrote down the date, the book, and the author for every single book that he read, like I think since the 70s until like ultimately like when he passed away in 2021. So that's just something that I do as well now, because I was like, well, I can't do it through Goodreads, and it's a fun little thing that I like to do as a tribute to him. So I write down every book that I read. And I was just going through it the other day, because I was like, what are some of the best books I've read recently? I can't remember. But one of the best books I've read recently was very, very recently, which is All the Fighting Parts by Hannah Sawyer. I just read that. I went to her launch event that she had in New York, and not only is she such a kind person, this is her debut novel. It's a novel in verse about a young girl who is assaulted by a pastor in her church, and it's about her journey, kind of speaking up on it, and it is just so gorgeous. It is written in verse. It's just an incredible story. Hannah herself is also an incredible person, but just this book is so, so good, and just one of those examples of like, this book needs to be taught in schools, because it is just so impactful, and it's going to be such a helpful book for teenagers to be able to read this and maybe understand their experiences more if this is something they've gone through. And it's just absolutely phenomenal. I'm losing my words because of how much I love that book. I read it in like 2 sittings. You can easily fly through it because it is in verse, so it's like much shorter, and it has like multimedia as well. I cannot recommend that book enough. It was like the most instant 5 stars I've given all year.
I love it. Well, I'm sure your dad is, loving that you're using his method of
I'm sure. Yes,
keeping track of your books.
Yes, I'm sure. He was trying to get me to do it before, so now he's like, you finally saw the light.
Well, thank you for sharing that book. I've seen that one, around the social media verse too, so I've got to add that one to my list, because I do love books in verse.
Yes, deserves all the buzz that it's getting. Cannot recommend enough.
Well, great. Well, Elle, thank you so much for chatting with me. I'm so excited for Caught in a Bad Fauxmance to come out, for 10 Things I Hate About Prom to come out, and for The Girl You Know to come out. It's going to be a wonderful couple of years for you, and it's going to be so exciting. So thanks for letting us get to know you and sharing your story with us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This was so lovely.